Hi everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about the origins of English settlement in the Americas. So everything that we've looked at so far in terms of European exploration, in terms of European discovery of the New World, has been about or has been focused on Spain and Portugal. Spain and Portugal have been the ones who have been carrying out this exploration. But we know that the English are going to play an immensely important role in the exploration of the Americas. And to get an understanding of the context for that, we need to think a little bit about the Protestant Reformation. So these two huge events in the history of Western civilization that are happening at the same time. The Age of Exploration, that begins in the 15th century, begins around 1450, discovery of America in 1492, and the Protestant Reformation that begins in 1517. So right around the same time as the Spanish are discovering the New World, as Europeans are discovering the New World, there's this expansion of European influence. There are these divisions within Europe about Christianity and different forms of Christianity that are emerging. And this is particularly true in England. And these different approaches to Christianity do have an impact on English exploration, English discovery, English settlement of the Americas. That's why I'm spending a little bit of time on it now. So before the Protestant Reformation, basically everyone in Europe is Catholic Christian. Then you have the Protestant Reformation, and people start to break away from the Catholic Church in different parts of Europe. And in England, this happens, as we probably all remember, pretty famously because Henry VIII wants to be able to divorce his wife so he can marry another woman. And so he breaks with the papacy. But Henry VIII did not like Protestant theology. He didn't like Protestant theology, and even less, he disliked Protestant rituals. And so the English church becomes known as the Anglican Church. After Henry VIII, it starts to take on some aspects of Protestant theology, but it retains a Catholic structure. It still has bishops, it still has cathedrals, it still has pomp and circumstance in its liturgy, all of which a lot of the Protestant reformers had condemned. And so you have this Anglican Church that's kind of a halfway house. Its theology is Protestant, and it's led by the King of England or the Queen of England rather than the Pope. But it looks very Catholic. But those who want to remain Catholic in England are persecuted for doing so. So we have the Anglicans, which is a state religion that looks Catholic but is Protestant. We have the Catholics who look a lot like the state religion but who are persecuted, imprisoned, executed for practicing Catholicism. And then you have this third group that emerges, that don't only have Protestant theology, that aren't only Protestant, but also look and act Protestant, and have got rid of a lot of the traditional ceremonial and don't like and condemn the hierarchies that we associate with Catholicism and with Anglicanism. This group is called the Puritans. So you have these three groups. The Anglicans, the state religion, looks Catholic but is Protestant. Catholics look Catholic, are Catholic, persecuted by the state, and Puritans look Protestant, are Protestant, also persecuted by the state. Because just as the English monarchs saw the Catholics as a threat, because the Catholics wanted to minimize the authority of the monarch, or lessen the authority of the monarch, and raise the authority of the papacy, so that was a threat to the monarch. The Puritans wanted to get rid of all monarchs and all bishops and have more local parliaments and conventions. And this was seen as very radical and very destabilizing. And so the English monarchs, who are the head of the Anglican Church, persecute both Puritans and Catholics. So that's the religious context. And even though all that is happening in Europe, it does, as we'll see as we go through the course, have significance, have an important bearing on English settlement of the Americas. When does English settlement of the Americas begin? English exploration actually begins before the Protestant Reformation. It begins in 1497. Henry VIII's father who represented a new dynasty, the Tudor dynasty, wanted a triumph for this new dynasty, wanted to emphasize the legitimacy of this new dynasty, and so he provided support for yet another Italian explorer named John Cabot to explore the North Atlantic, to try and find a way further north than Columbus to reach Asia, to reach China going west. And John Cabot discovers Newfoundland, Canada, and we see in the rest of the late 15th and early 16th century, we see some English attempts to settle Canada and establish colonies in Newfoundland, but it doesn't really work. Just going to wait for my lawnmower here to turn the volume down. Let's skip ahead a little bit. Okay, I think he's moving on. So, at first, English efforts to conquer the Spanish Main, English efforts to settle the Americas are unsuccessful. And so it's the Spanish who have been successful. They've established colonies, they're bringing huge wealth into their empire, establishing a greater and greater empire because of these explorations. And the English efforts to settle have been a failure. And so instead, the English determined to spoil the Spaniards' efforts, or spoil the wealth that the Spanish are receiving from the Americas. And so they do this by setting up privateers. Part of the reason the English want to take on the Spanish, it comes back to religion. Spanish are Catholics, Catholic kings, they're promoting Catholicism, they're attacking the English to try and restore England to Catholicism. The English are promoting rebellions in the Spanish Empire to encourage Protestantism. That's why, so again, it comes back to the Protestant Reformation. That's why the English and the Spanish are fighting. That's why the English want to cripple the wealth that the Spanish are bringing to Europe from the New World, that they're using to fund armies to fight against English Protestants. And so the English start to fit out ships called privateers that are basically pirates. They try and sink Spanish treasure ships, and they try and raid and destroy Spanish colonies along the coast of the Caribbean, along the coast of Mexico. And the English also try and undermine the Spanish economic system of the New World. And this is an economic system called protectionism. Protectionism was a system by which any colony, and so this is the system that the Spanish are using, so I'm going to use the name Spanish, a system in which a Spanish colony could only trade with Spain at the prices that Spain set. And so it was designed to advantage the Spanish kingdom, and it didn't really take the interests of the colony into account. And so the way in which the English try and undermine this is that they start to trade with the Spanish colonies, but for cheaper prices, for better prices for the colonies than they would get by trading with Spain. But this means that Spain loses money. Okay, so just to draw an example, because I know it's a little difficult with these, it's a little difficult with these terms. So let's say that you're a Spanish leather merchant. And so you know that the Spanish colonies are only allowed to trade with you. And so therefore you set pretty high prices for selling leather to Spanish colonists in the New World. But then you show up there at a certain point, and the Spanish colonists say, oh, we already did our business with someone who said they were Spanish, and their prices were way better than yours. And they really know that it was an English merchant. But that's how the English are undercutting the system. The English get the business, the colonists get a better rate. Who loses out? The Spanish merchant and the Spanish government that would get tax revenue from the business that he does in the colonies. So these are the two ways in which the English try and undermine the advantages that the Spanish are gaining in their rivalry with the English because of their New World colonies. through privateer ships that sink Spanish treasure ships, and through false flag merchants that undermine the protectionist economy that the Spanish have set up. Eventually, the English are bold enough to try and establish settlements of their own again. And a man named Walter Raleigh, who was one of these privateers, who was a particular favorite of Elizabeth I, the queen at the time, the Tudor queen at the time, gets permission to try and found a colony in the land that he discovered, that he'd named Virginia after Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen. And so Walter Raleigh goes to Virginia and he sets up a colony that's called the Roanoke Colony. And life is hard, but the colonies kind of manage to hold together for about 4 years. But they're running out of supplies. And so the leader of the colony says, I'm going to go back to England to get us some more supplies so we can keep going. Because they're not totally self-sufficient yet. They're getting some food, but they're not totally self-sufficient. And so he goes back to England. He goes back to England in 1587. And what does he find but that the English are preparing to try and fight off the biggest Spanish invasion yet? The invasion of the Spanish Armada. And they say, we can't possibly give you a ship. We're using every ship. We need every ship to fight against the Spanish Armada. And so he has to stay in England while the English fight against the Spanish Armada. When they do, the English win. This is a really important moment. 1588, English victory over the Spanish Armada marks the point at which you start to see England overtaking Spain as the leading power in Europe and certainly the leading power at sea. And this will make it much easier for the English to establish their own colonies in the Americas. What it means in the short term, however, is that when the leader of the Roanoke colony goes back there, the colonies disappeared. That's why it's called the Lost Roanoke Colony. No one really knows what happens to it. I've attached a video that talks about this more. And so the colonies disappeared. So although the English are in a great place to overtake the Spanish as the leading power in the New World, as the leading power in the Atlantic at the end of the 16th century, when we hit 1600, in 1600, there are no successful English settlements. English settlements, English colonies in the New World are all going to be a product of the 17th century that I'll talk about in the next video.